Welcome back, everyone. We are here for our final program of the day, Mainstream's Next Steps, about mainstream comics and its intersection with queer stories. Here we have some amazing guests with us again today, and to wrap up this first day of the Prism Comics celebration, leading up to our award ceremony tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific time. Please remember to adjust that time to whatever your local time may be. And without further ado, I'll allow our amazing guests to introduce themselves to you and get started.
Well, Colleen, you're the finalist. I think you should go. You should do your introduction.
My name is Colleen AF Venable. AF is my actual middle name, and it stands for Anthelicity. And it's very funny to me because it's actually my confirmation name. And if you've read the book, there's a lot about being Catholic. So I'm so Catholic, but not Catholic at all, that I switched my confirmation name. But I'm so not Catholic that my confirmation name became a curse word. So I made a book called Kiss Number 8 with Ellen Crenshaw. She's amazing, couldn't be here tonight. But it is all about a queer coming of age set in 2004, which both feels like forever ago, but also kind of feels contemporary because it was the start of a lot of technology, a lot of texting. And it was also just the start of people starting to really accept the LGBTQI plus community. You know, it was like the first gay marriages were happening that year all around the country. And so it was a very pivotal point, I feel like, for, you know, civil rights in general. And I wanted to set the story then. And I've been really lucky. I'm so honored to be a finalist. The book also got recognized by the National Book Award, and I also like to say it's the only comic that got recognized last year. So I feel very, very proud. And this year I was actually asked to be a judge on the committee. So I'm very proud. We have our 10 long list titles have been announced. It's the first time ever we've had 2 trans writers, and I'm just so excited to be here.
That's awesome. I'm William O. Tyler. I am also a comic creator. Last year I co-edited Theater of Terror, Revenge of the Queers with Justin Hall. But I'm here today as a judge. I help judge this category. And I have to say, reading through all of the submissions were great. All of our finalists are great. And it's just so rewarding to be able to have this kind of content in mainstream. You know, our queer content usually happens in the margins and in independent circles. And what is it like for you, Colleen, to be able to tell these kind of stories, but have the mainstream audience behind it?
I mean, it's kind of funny because I sold Kiss Number 8 a really long time ago. Mm-hmm. So I actually sold the book in 2008. So I wrote it in 2004, sold it in 2008, or I started writing in 2004. And when I was trying to get a publisher to pick it up, there was so much pushback in 2008. And there was 2 publishers in particular that said the same line that just like kind of destroyed me, which was like, oh my gosh, we love it, but we already have a gay comic. And I was like, or we already have a gay book. They didn't even have a comic. And first of all, I was like, well, actually, she's bi. But like, you know, but like, and I just remember they said it in a way as if like, oh, sorry, I don't like the color green. You know, it was like as if it was just like a normal thing to say. And I just remember being so like just disheartened and just, you know, like I did indie comics too. My indie comics were like all web comics, and like I did a lot of photo comics. It was very like, you know, just like playful. And to have this thing that I had worked on for like, you know, 4 years and have people telling me that they couldn't buy it because it was going to cannibalize this other book. And I was like, do you realize how many people out there like need these books?
Yeah. And need more than one. Like we can use more than one book. Thank you.
Yeah. And at the time there was like a handful of books that were out. It was like Geography Club and Boy Meets Boy had just come out, which was amazing. And they all, with the exception of Boy Meets Boy, they all were like focused entirely on gay characters, barely any lesbian characters, and 0 bi characters. And let's not even get into the realm of like non-binary. There was none of that.
Right.
And there was a very first trans character in a book that came out in 2004, and that was Luna by Julianne Peters. And I wanted to have a book that kind of showed all the different types of love, and there was pushback. So it was submitted to about 30 publishers, and
Wow.
First Second was the only offer, and they were so excited about the book. And it was just so nice to have them just get it. And it's like the fact that the 3 finalists this year are all First Second, like that says a lot about how ahead of the rest of the industry they were. Like not ahead of the world, because the world was there.
Right.
It's just like this little publishing world didn't get it. So, yeah.
So if you sold it in 2008, what was the process of selling it and, getting from the point of selling it to actually putting it out there? That's a number of years. And I know the mainstream process is so different from the independent process.
Yeah.
So what's that like?
So part of it was, I was actually working at First Second as a designer. I got to design Vera Broskell and like Jen Wang and Jinlu and Yang. And because of that, I saw how busy my coworkers were. And I was like the opposite of a squeaky wheel. So it'd be like, there's like these pile of things that had to be edited, and it was like, these things are on fire, and yours is down here. And we haven't found an illustrator yet, so it doesn't matter. And it took a while, just because like, I was like, don't worry about it. And then finally at one point I was like, oh my God, they burn each other's CDs. Like it was like a plot in the book that one character was constantly giving music to the other character. And I was like, oh God, we have to like set this back. Like we need to like make it a historical book. And then we had an incredible artist that was lined up at first, who was still in college actually at the time. And for anybody out there, like that's never done a long graphic novel, make mini comics, like write your own stuff, like do books. Like if you've never done any of that, maybe don't jump into 300 pages because it's terrifying. You're not going to get paid enough to live off of, and it's going to be very all-consuming. And she did an incredible job, but after 5 years, she was just like, I'm not ready for this. And, I'd love to think that the mainstream comics world pays enough to live off of, but, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And, like, if she could make more money doing a single illustration for, like, magazine when magazines existed, like, why wouldn't she do that rather than drawing, 300 pages?
Yeah.
So, granted, that's, like, it's not that bad thing, but, like, you know what I mean? So,
yeah, I mean, because we still have to pay rent and stuff, so yeah. We kind of need the income. And there's a big difference, too, I think, between passion projects and then for hire projects. I know clearly this is your baby. This is a passion project for you as a writer-creator. So how was the collaborative effort in finding an artist and ending up with L&T Crenshaw?
She is just incredible. We wound up sitting next to each other at MICE in Massachusetts, and just totally like became best friends. Like within like 2 hours of sitting near each other, we were handing each other gold medals by the end. We had made medals, and they had been auditioning people at First Second, and people would come in and they'd either be like super sincere but weren't funny, or they'd be really funny but didn't get the struggle and the heart parts. And Ellen and I did a mini comic called Creepin' Out the Creepers that was all about if people hit on you and they're gross, like the best thing to do is like don't yell at them because they like that. Don't ignore them because they also like that. The best thing to do is weird them out. Like do something that's so weird that they're like, I just engaged with someone that's like weirder than I am. So I did a whole series of those with a couple other artists, like Just Fake did one. And the one with Ellen was like, this like gross guy on the subway like blows kisses to this woman, and she looks at him and she like kind of puts her shoulder over, and then she catches them from the air sweetly, and then she eats them like a monster. And it was just the drawing was so good, and like every single background character in that subway, she drew every detail, and it was just for a goof. It was like a $1 mini comic I sold, you know. And I showed that to my editor for a second, and she like lost her mind over it and like loved it. And Callista Brill, and she auditioned Ellen, and Ellen's sketches came in for the characters, and it was like this light came down from the heavens, you know. And then we worked, like I always say, like when people say like, "Oh, you're the writer and she's illustrator," I was like, "No, we're co-creators." Like,
that's
yeah,
great.
the story was like came from me and my upbringing, but every single panel was better because we worked together and talked it through. And like when I saw her pencils the first time, I took out so much text, which is ridiculous because there's too much text still, if you ask me. It's like I look at it and I'm like, I want it more. Why is there stuff on her art at all? Couldn't even been wordless. So we're just like super fans of each other, and I think the story really connected with her as well. Like maybe not the queer elements, but a lot of things about growing apart from your friends and having parents you're not quite clicking with as a teen, and feeling like you're always walking on eggshells, you know? So that was definitely a really great collaboration with her. She also made sure all the clothing was authentic to 2004, which I have to just say, like, that is yeah. It's like, but it made it so much better. It was like that belt. I had that belt, you know? It's like all the punk gear they wore. I was definitely like going to mindless self-indulgence. And it's a name.
You know, that kind of thing seems like no big deal, but it's those little details that really make the book feel more authentic and relatable. And it's a great book, I have to tell you. Having read it as one of the submissions. And it has a lot of heart and it's very touching. I loved it. Which is why you're a finalist.
I mean, I also love the other books that were selected.
Yes.
Like, if you haven't read Bloom, it's just like, first of all, I don't know how many carbs I ate while reading that book because it was so food-centric in such a sexy way. I was like, with her hands done. It's so good, and it's just so beautifully drawn. And, of course, Laura Dean, like, Mariko is, like, incredible. I mean, she's one of the first people putting queer comics into the mainstream. And, you know, having read Skim years ago and seeing this, like, gorgeous depiction, like, the art was amazing, the writing was amazing, the mix of the two was so solid. Like, there's a lot of times I'll read a comic and I'll be like, why is this a comic? Like, I love comics, so I want everything to be a comic, but, like, was there anything you did here that you couldn't have done in prose?
Right.
And I think that's the thing that comics can do so much. And I mean, I think they could do a lot more than prose in a lot of ways. Like, I was really proud of the scene Ellen and I did where it's the unreliable narrator, where the father is basically talking about how his mother was such a horrible mother, but then you see the images and you're like, actually, they're pretty incredible, and they were the person that was like there for you. And just, it's like, was he lying, or did he remember it wrong, or did he just like block out the fact that like his parent was this incredible parent and he just abandoned them?
Yeah.
So it definitely, like, in other mediums, I don't even know how you would do that. So it was so much fun collaborating with Ellen. Like, I feel like I was so spoiled.
Was there anything that Ellen added story-wise that wasn't there? Like, did her art inspire something to develop in the story that wasn't there already, or anything like that?
I would say, yeah, I mean, she definitely, like, the book was 280 pages before Ellen came on, and it wound up being 320 by the end, because she was like, I really like this scene, I want to expand it, and I want to make, like, a giant baseball stadium. And then she's like, why did I agree to this? Oh my God, it was my idea. But there would be points in time where she just really wanted to have more breathing room for the emotion. And like, just, I panel out the pages, but I do it like, just like, I say panel 1, this, panel 2, this. And I might say like, there's 3 quick panels, but like the rule for me is like, this is just in case you don't have an idea what I'm going for, but you are the person that does the panel layouts. You're the person that figures out how the beats should go. And she just took scenes that were like sort of working and made them so strong and emotional. She's just so good at that sort of thing, like a close-up of someone's hand, and just the way she does hand gestures, you could see what they're feeling by like how taut their hand is, or if their hand's in a fist. And it's really good. And I also just loved her character design, and she understood kind of what I wanted to go for with Kat, who's kind of like, people are like, oh, that's the bad guy, and I was like, Kat's not the bad guy. Kat's been through some shit.
Yeah.
She's a great friend. She had a pretty horrible reaction to, Mads is coming out. I like to think she would get better over time, but who knows? But I love the fact that it's such a body positive depiction of a cool girl. Because you always think of like the cool girl, like growing up in the like 80s and 90s, it's like, oh, the twiggy blonde, what cool. And this was like a girl who like had meat on her and but had no problem like wearing all these awesome outfits. And as someone that like struggled with my weight all growing up, it was just such a nice, I didn't even give her that direction. And she just drew this like awesome, curvy, super punk, like the best friend that when you're in Catholic school that you like wish you had because they're so cool and you're so not. It was just like she really did add a lot. And our editor is also like really like, that's one thing I have to say that I love about mainstream. I always say that the big difference between a good writer or a good book and a great book is people that are willing to listen to feedback. And if you listen to somebody and they're like, oh, this isn't working for me, you don't have to be like, well, you don't get this, this, and this. You could be like, take a step back and be like, why didn't it affect them emotionally the way it was supposed to? Or is it even working? Is it even necessary? Like, there's a couple characters I killed off. There's a whole 100 pages at the end that disappeared where you found out Laura was gay and secretly had a girlfriend. And that's one of the reasons she freaked out that she was mad. And it was like this whole big thing that it was like, I don't know, we equated it to like the end of Lord of the Rings, and it's like, we destroyed the ring. Now let's go on for 200 pages and go back to the Shire. And it was like, wait, what? And it was kind of that. So like, I like the idea that you have this ambiguity with Laura, especially, who I feel like is the one character I feel so bad for. She's the third wheel all the time.
Yeah.
And, it's obvious through a lot of, and again, it's mostly Ellen's art. Like, it's obvious she has a crush on her friend who has a crush on her other friend. So it's like this weird love triangle where everybody's just like misreading everything. Which, I mean, I feel like what high school was like. It was just...
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, high school is a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication.
Seriously. Yeah. And just like not knowing what emotions are. It's like, am I really admiring this person or do I have a crush on this person? And like, I don't know what that means. So.
And for the queer experience, it's even more heightened,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I didn't even realize I had any like bi tendencies until like way later, like probably like my 30s, until I was like, oh, these like friend crushes I have. Oh no, they're crushes. Like it's just like I just really like her. And like Grant, so my sister came out of the closet in 1995 in a family so Catholic that my dad was going to be a priest before he met my mom. Mm-hmm. And my aunts are all nuns. And they just have...
Wow, that's pretty in there.
Like my dad was like, no joke, for Halloween, he would dress up as a priest as his Halloween costume. Like this tiny little priest. And he had like the Necca wafers, those flat wafers.
Yeah.
And when people would open the door, instead of saying trick or treat, he would hold it up to them and go, the body of Christ. And they would have to like lean down. And if you're Catholic, like you put it on your tongue.
So trick-or-treaters would have to do communion?
No, he did. He was the one trick-or-treating. They would like open the door ready to give him candy, and he would give them like the Eucharist. And like, I just love that story so much. But yeah, they like it was, and my parents have come a long way. They're amazing now. They're so supportive of my sister, and like even it was only this year that I finally was like, "Hey, Mom, guess what? 2 for 2." But it just was like watching her go from the good kid to the bad kid because she had like a crush on someone, like was so strange to me. And I got in. It was like my only physical fights had to do with like people talking shit about her in school, and because of that, word traveled around that I was like this, like I was a safe space.
Mm.
And people I didn't even know in high school would come up to me like, "Hey, are you Kathy Venable's sister?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they'd be like, "Oh my God, I'm gay." And I'd be like, "Cool." And they'd be like, "Okay, thanks, bye." And I was like, "Bye."
That's kind of awesome, though. I love that.
Lots of times. It was so, and it was just because people were desperate to talk to someone that would treat them exactly the same. They just wanted to say it out loud. They wanted somebody to be like, "All right, awesome." Like, and thinking now, like going to schools, and luckily, System 8 came out, in 2019 when the world was a little more normal, to say the least.
Right.
And we got to go to so many schools and meet so many awesome queer kids, and just like see them being themselves at like an age where so many of us, like growing up in the 90s, were just couldn't express ourselves and didn't have that safe space and would run up to a stranger and then run away because they knew like they would never really have to see me again, or like in the hallway. But it's so great that mainstream publishers are now making these books available, and librarians are making incredible displays of books for kids so they could really find them. And as much as I'd like to think it's easy for people to come out now, there's still so many places it's not.
Yeah.
Like we got an email from this woman. I think she was 20. She was 19 or 20, and out of school, and she was Mormon, and she was gay, and did not know what to do.
Yeah.
Because she was like, I read your book and I liked that it wasn't anti-faith. And I was like, yeah, you could totally still, be any religion and also be queer. And she just like was asking for advice, what to do, how to come out. She had never come out. We were the first people she was telling, and it was like this, like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe this is still happening in like this year. I'm so used to. I live in New York. I'm used to, like, I'm confused when people are straight. I'm like, are you sure you're totally straight? Like totally, like anything. And it was really kind of scary to think about how it still is in a lot of places in the South, and a lot of religions that are still not coming, still like, yeah, I don't know. It's just the last 4 years have been like, blah. And luckily, talking to her more, she worked part-time at a bookstore, and I was like, oh, thank God. Like, I was like, come out to any of your coworkers, like any of them, you'll be fine. And she did, and they were great. And it was like, because, anybody that reads, they're going to be open-minded. And they're going to, like, even if you live in Salt Lake City, they're going to still be really awesome, probably. So,
it's funny how your knowledge goes up the more you read.
Yeah.
That works.
I know, right? It's weird. Yeah, it's definitely, I lived off of books growing up, and I wish there were, more things like Kiss Number 8, so I could have thought about these things earlier.
You talked about getting feedback from collaborators and editors, but working with mainstream, was there any feedback from editors that was like, we can't do this? Like, because you also have a book with younger characters who are kind of burgeoning and exploring and learning about themselves. And a lot of times, queer content automatically gets categorized as sexual and adult. So were your editors like completely okay with what you wanted to present, or did they want to change any things like that?
I have to say, they were actually really Like, there was no pushback.
That's awesome.
Which I was kind of shocked with. There's a couple pages that I was just like, well, and even like in terms of like language, like it didn't feel authentic to have teens that didn't curse, and didn't drink, and didn't smoke, and like all these things. Like, have you ever met a teen? Come on. And I really didn't have pushback. The pushback I had was actually from the other direction, which was things like, we realized at first, and this was like an early draft, that the only trans character in the book was dead.
Mm.
And that was like a moment of being like, oh my gosh, I'm basically like just making them a plot device. Like, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And then I had this moment of being like, what if we added a character that you don't know the entire book until the end is trans? And that was Darren. And Darren like wound up being like my favorite side. Like, I freaking love Darren. I love him so much. His sister, not so much. She does some dumb things. But I just love that there's this conversation at the end where Darren's like, you're going to find out anyway, like, because there's jerks in the school. Like, I'd rather you hear it from me. And she's just like, you're Darren. Like, it doesn't matter. And I hope that that reveal was a lovely surprise for both kids that are trans, but also for kids that have never met anyone that's trans and maybe also like had Darren as their favorite character because he's like the best. And then realize like, oh shit, like, okay, cool. Like, it's such a there's not a conversation there. And I like that there's not a conversation. It's like 2 lines and that's it. To the point that you could even miss it. And, you know, so that was actually a great edit. And I feel like it helped the book so much in terms of like feeling like it was representing more, but also being true to what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely knowing the original cut, that's definitely an improvement.
Yeah, seriously. Like, to the point that we were like, why didn't we think of that?
Yeah, because we fall into, I mean, even as queer creators, we sometimes fall into our own tropes as well. And it's great to have someone say, hey, you know, let's do better in this or that. So yeah, I love that was a positive spin on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing that the editors also did was we had to keep it authentic to 2004. But there's a lot of terms from 2004 that do not fly. They should never have flown. But
right.
But
very
like,
true.
do we say these things and have it be that, or do we like figure out a way to like get around it, where they never actually say something that's not yet a term, but they don't say the term that's horrible and should never have existed. And that was a weird balance to like try to do a historical piece, but not make it as depressing as the actual history was. Yeah, that was an odd one. I think the only thing we wound up keeping that was like credibly recognizable was like the gay straight alliance. Was like, you know, the original term for, you know, the groups in school. I think that's probably the only one that's like, you could actually be like, oh, that's a weird dated term. Like everything else we tried to like keep away from. But it would have been weird to be like, let's go hang out in the group. Like, let's go to our club meeting.
Yeah.
Hey guys. So we're starting to get closer towards the end. We still got a little less than 15 minutes. I think that brought up a question for me about language from 2004 when I was a senior in high school. And I greatly remember 2003 to 2004 being this massive rise in the negative use of the phrase, that's so gay. And it may have been different in other places, but, you know, was there any conversation about that as a historical element in specific?
I mean, I definitely remember the term being used a lot. And I mean, it's still used now, which is just hurts me. And yeah, I mean, it never came up as part of the story because I couldn't imagine any of the characters say, it didn't feel like their voice. You know, I think Kat is the only character that would maybe say it, but she was so like obsessed with herself that she probably wouldn't even recognize, like say things about someone else's feelings and thoughts. So yeah, luckily that wasn't it. But yeah, the fact that that was like a term that was widely said, like I remember a teacher saying it once, and like even something like saying like that's so lame, like that's offensive to, like it's like all these things are like when you realize the origin of words, and like I've recently found out about certain origins, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've been saying that my whole life. Like I didn't know that gypped was connected to gypsies, and you know things like that where you're just like, I just thought it was a like I don't know, a Yiddish word. I just assumed like schmear. But it was finding out origins is sometimes really disturbing because so many things came from horrible things, like especially, you know, like there's just been a lot of lists of like idioms and like where do idioms come from. It's like, oh yeah, they always come from horrible racists. Cool. Like, good to know. But yeah, there was definitely like we would never have had like something like that's so gay, which even hurts to come out of my mouth, just because we knew that would be triggering. And like I'm gonna pretend there's an alternate reality universe or whatever that never used that term and keep it out.
That's the great thing about being a creator is that, you know, even when you're doing a historical type of context, you still can kind of create your own world, what flows and what doesn't in your world, and creating something that will help push things progressively, positively into the future, as opposed to holding on to those old, horrible baggage terms. That's one of my favorite things as a creator is being able to say, this is what the world could and should look like, as opposed to, you know, this is the horrible stuff that we need to keep revisiting.
Yeah, absolutely. And like one thing that I would like to do in the future too is like I love books like Bloom and Laura Dean because they are just about experiences. They are not a coming out story. And I feel like at this point we've got a lot of coming out stories. What we need are representation. Like the fact that I can't think of any mainstream comics that feature an ace protagonist. Like, I don't know if there are any. Maybe there's some in the works, but I would say like talking at panels at like bookseller conventions and publishing conventions and bringing that up, I had people in the audience be like, "What is that?" And they couldn't wrap their head around it, which was a disturbing thing. And I'm so upset too that like. It's such a dumb thing, but like Riverdale, the fact that they have Jughead dating women makes me so upset because I was like, no, it's canon. He's asexual. Come on.
Yeah, I feel you.
It's just that is something that I don't think has been there, and I think it's because publishers think that, you know, in some ways still that romance sells and love triangles sell and things like that, and like the idea of being a teenager and not being completely like obsessed with sex is like, you know, foreign to a lot of people. And I mean, you still can be ace and obsessed with sex, but in different ways, you know. But and I like that's one of the stories that I could never write myself, you know. And I don't think I am the person to write that. I want to be able to hand a really great manuscript to my publisher from someone else and be like, yeah. And that's one of the reasons too why like at first the trans character, like the grandparent, like I'm not trans, I haven't had that experience, and that's part of the reason why it became this, you know, background story rather than the main story, because I didn't think it was my place to tell that. So it was really great to have, we had a trans woman who helped us like make sure we got it right, you know, and it was also an older trans woman that I really loved too, because like I wanted to be like, what was it like to come out, you know, how many years ago? Like not as many years ago. She didn't come out in the 60s, but like in the story, it's like a character that comes out in the 60s, and part of me wants to like do all the historical research and try to do a story that's all about, you know, Sam. But I'm like, it's not my place. Like if someone else wants to take my character and run with it, I would love that. So I'm putting that into the universe.
If that's another collaboration, that would be great.
It would be so good. It would be so good. So Yeah, so it's really, I think mainstream has come a long way, but also like has a long way to go still.
Yeah.
You know? And it's, as much as I'd like to think that everybody's heart is in the right place, a lot of them, it's like it's still about their wallets, and it's like it's so great that there's this like budding diversity movement, but they are still like, are they doing it because they realize these books are going to sell now because there is such a massive strong like LGBTQIA plus community, and or are they doing it because they genuinely believe these books should exist?
Yeah.
And I think all publishers should ask themselves that question, and if it is the first one, then maybe take a step back and be like, am I even the right editor for this? Like, should I be? And why am I not? Like, why do I?
I think the key definitely is having queer people behind the scenes. It's the creators, editors. Then that's what makes it more authentic, because we understand these stories and we can express these stories better than cis hetero,
yeah,
straight white men.
Yeah. Which I have to say, mainstream publishing is getting so much better in terms of hiring, but the heads of most of the companies are still straight white men. And it's like, especially in an industry that's for, kids and teens, it's been predominantly 90% women since like the dawn of children's publishing, because it was like this little thing that the women could do when they don't actually need to make money for, it was like the thing you did if you were a rich woman, a rich white woman. And you didn't care about getting paid because it was like, oh, I'm helping the children. It was like, so the fact that like now like companies are actually going out of their way to make sure that they're hiring like a diverse group, and like, with Kiss Number 82, my designer is like queer, and I had 2 editors on the book. One of my editors was queer, and it was so nice to like, marketing person was queer. I was just like, yeah. It just felt like we all kind of came together and just made a book that we wish it existed when we were teens.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so good questions too.
With our last couple of minutes to wrap up on, I think it'd be good to get both of your takes on sort of two different sides of a similar thing. Part of which might be self-serving for the Prism Awards, but the first part being, why do we care? Why is it significant in any way that queer content is represented in mainstream media? And then the other part of that is there a significance to mainstream being a part of these awards? Would these awards be different if it was all small and mid-sized and indie publishers or independent publishers and we didn't include mainstream? Because that was actually a conversation we had when we were starting up the awards. As being part of this category on both sides as a judge and then as a finalist, what is the significance of including mainstream in the awards as well?
Yeah.
For you.
Well, I would say I think it's good to include mainstream. It's definitely like mainstream is there. There's no way around it. I think it's good to include it as its own category, because putting mainstream and having them compete against independent publishers that's a deal breaker. Because independent publishers just don't have the resources or the finances to push their work as much as mainstream. But that doesn't mean that there isn't great and important things happening in the mainstream as well. So recognizing both is important. And I would say that having mainstream representation is great, just because representation matters. I mean, that's the cliche now, but it's true. Speaking, because I'm also a film critic, and speaking from the film side of things, it's just amazing that I've watched so many movies over the years. I mean, I watched a lot of movies, and it wasn't until 2016, when Moonlight came out, that I actually felt like I saw myself on the screen. And that's a whole different feeling. And people have that same experience with reading comics and reading stories that that they can see themselves in, not just queer people like finding ourselves in straight stories, because we have so many straight stories, and we can do that easily. We can read all the coding and all of that. But to have a blatant representation of who we are that we can see is very important for our existence.
Yeah. I feel like, growing up, I didn't read Sweet Valley High because I didn't think I could relate to them. So I read Merville Mall, which nobody even knows. It was like the ripoff, but they were brunettes. And I was like, I don't understand that about these ones. And like, as, 9-year-old or whatever age I was, that meant a lot to me. Because that was like the late 80s when blondes were everywhere. And I just felt very, like, out of it, and not seen. And that's such a superficial thing. But my thing, it's just like, yeah, you want to be able to be seen. And I think the thing with mainstream comics is they're going to wind up in libraries. They're going to wind up in bookstores. They're going to wind up in places that, in Salt Lake City, where a random bookseller is going to come across the book and read it and realize that she could reach out to this author and, like, come out of the closet to this author, which was amazing, but also terrifying. And it's like having true the fact that, like, Prism Comics is, like, if it says it on a mainstream book, that same teen would see that and look up other things and find the indie books that may not already be in their library, and maybe even tell their librarian or their bookstore about these indie publishers. And because a lot of times the books aren't there just because they don't know about these small presses. And, I do think sometimes, like, at some of the smaller shows, it makes more sense to not have the big presses there, not have mainstream it, because, like, we need to be able to see the stories that are being told. And not everybody was as lucky as I was to have been, like, I was working as a designer at a house. Would I have had any ability to get published in, like, the late aughts? When it was, like, people also wanted, like, people that wrote and drew. Like, they didn't understand the idea of just a comic script. And I just feel like I love that there's a mainstream category. And, like, again, same thing. I love that it's not that it is its own category. Because, like, there's just so many good books. And there's so many, like, I feel like the indies are still doing it better than the mainstream.
I would agree.
We're getting there. And I also feel like the art is so, in the indie world, you have art that can be the pioneer.
Yeah. And
in the mainstream world, they're trying to do what they already know and understand. And there are some places, like, for a second, where they're so tuned into the indie world, they are more aware of all the different art styles out there. But then a lot of mainstream ones, like, you see these books come out and you're just like, okay. Like, either they go for, like, a very weird, like, superhero style, or they go for, like, this super cutesy style. It doesn't work for, like, a coming-of-age teen story. So, yeah, I'm really happy that there's, the different categories. And selfishly, I'm really happy because then it helps expand my to-read list. Though I do have my favorites for tomorrow. Even in the mainstream category, and I will say it's not my book. They're so good. How can I compete with those? I'm just so glad to be part of it, So, yeah. I think hopefully in the next couple of years, there's going to be even more amazing things coming out, and no pun intended, but I think.
Yeah, I do feel the things are changing for the better.
Yeah.
Overall, I think that things are moving forward in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're going to be in a better place in a lot of ways. So, anybody watching that hasn't registered to vote yet?
Shameless plug. Nobody's.
Yeah.
Being part of a charitable nonprofit, we are not endorsing any specific candidates, but we will tell you to get your butt out there and vote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I get to vote at the Brooklyn Museum. It's like the coolest place ever.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, right? To vote, and then I get to walk around.
That's super.
It just opened again.
Sweet. Yeah, I think before COVID happened, I was looking into making a cartoon art museum be a place where you could go and vote. So whenever things are safe again, we'll look into that opportunity for anybody that's that's local to the neighborhood. So we do have one more question that I think it can be well incorporated into our wrap up for this panel and this day. We're coming to a close for day one, and so as you're asking, oh, there's one more request to encourage people to complete your census. I think today might be the last day if it hasn't already passed. So as you wrap up and let everybody know how they can follow you and find out more about you and just become obsessed with all the amazing things that you put into the world through your creativity, could you also share any advice you might have for people thinking about getting into creating LGBTQ inclusive comics, and in this case, maybe specifically for how to approach that when thinking about going to a mainstream publisher or approaching a mainstream publisher?
I guess I'll start. I am Colleen AF everywhere on social media, and one thing I would say is grow some thick skin and realize that it's just an individual's opinion sometimes. And, like I said, Kiss Number 8 got rejected 30 times, and then it did pretty well. I had many books rejected before that, and eventually I had an editor who was like, I really like your brain. You're weird, and I like you. Like, what else do you have? And then I started to work with them. There are things like SCBWI, which is the Society of Children's Writers and Illustrators, and they occasionally will have a graphic novel specific program. And it's great because not only can you go and learn from people, but they do portfolio reviews and they do manuscript reviews with editors. And you'll get amazing advice, and also you get a connection. So if you're really interested in becoming like a mainstream creator, that's a great way to get your foot in the door and to get, things like agents. I'm a big believer in agents because in the mainstream world, again, you can focus on your stories and you could focus on what you care about, and you could focus on doing the best job you can representing what's in your heart. And they could focus on the contracts and money and all the stuff that it's important, but it's not the creative side. And I think if you could take that stress off of you, it's great. So especially like I said, anybody who's got a really good ace manuscript, please, I have to explain it to so many people. Give me a book that I can give to them.
And I'm William O. Tyler, and you can find me anywhere at William O. Tyler, any social media that's on me. But I would say if you're looking to break into creating comics at all, whether mainstream or independent, obviously harder in mainstream than independent, but always have an authentic voice. Tell your story, no matter how bizarre or esoteric or obscure you feel your experience is. There's someone who can relate, and there's someone who's out there looking for someone to relate to. So definitely just be authentic and tell your story. Don't feel that your story isn't important enough to be heard.
I'll say from over a decade of experience in on all sides, publishing, the museum, talking with librarians and everything, the things that are most popular are not the things that fit what you think they're looking for. The things that are most popular and get the most sort of, once they're out, find the sorry, I don't know what I'm saying here. I'm getting to the end of my energy. But
we got you.
Yeah, the ones that succeed and really sparking that same passion in readers are the ones that are true to an individual story, as opposed to something that is maybe I'm gonna try to do my own version of the Hardy Boys. But if that's all you have, you need those personal experiences, even if it's mainstream, to inform it and make it that little gem. I want to thank our panelists for being here with us today. Thank you so much. It has been amazing sitting here for 3 hours and just getting to chat and listen to these amazing conversations. I wouldn't, if I could choose, I'd do this every weekend if I could. If I could. And don't forget to join us tomorrow. We've got a whole nother slate. We've got 2 more panels, and then the final award ceremony is tomorrow on Pacific time, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. So please remember to tune in tomorrow as well. Share out what you're watching as much as possible, because these are up after they're actually recorded, so that way as many people as possible can benefit from it. So please remember to share out what you've been watching to others so that they can enjoy it and benefit from it as well. Thank you both so much. We'll show you the schedule for tomorrow, and with that, we'll wrap up our very first day for the Prism Awards celebration and ceremony. All right, thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow.